Nobody on Paulara 9 could figure out why the human carried a metal box everywhere he went. IT was not a weapon. It was not a tool. It did not beep or glow or connect to any known system. It was just a dull silver container with a clasp on the front, and every single day, the human named Ravi Anand walked into Work Hall 7, carrying it under his arm like it was the most important thing he owned. Ravi had been on the station for 3 months. He worked as a logistics coordinator on the lower decks, tracking cargo shipments and filing transport manifests. It was boring work, quiet work, the kind of job nobody fought over. He shared the hall with about 40 other beings from a dozen different species, and most of them had already decided what they thought of him. Humans were new to the galactic community. They came from a heavy, violent, unpredictable world full of storms and earthquakes and animals that killed for fun. Most species kept their distance. Not out of fear exactly, but out of the same instinct that made you step around a puddle you did not understand. Ravi did not mind. He showed up on time, did his work, and never caused trouble. But every day at the midday break, he did something that made the entire hall stop and stare. That he opened the box. The first time it happened, a Paul Yuri worker 3 seats away actually stood up and backed away from the table. The smell hit the room like a slow wave. It was warm and layered and completely alien to every nose, breathing slit, and scent receptor in the hall. Inside the box sat small compartments filled with things that had color and texture and moisture. Yellow rice, a thick brown stew with chunks of something soft, a pile of bright red and green pickled vegetables, a flat round bread folded into a quarter. It looked alive. It looked dangerous. It looked like nothing any of them had ever seen anyone eat. Every other species in the hall ate the same way. They consumed nutrition in its simplest form. The Paul Yuri dissolved protein cubes in warm liquid and drank them. The Bravani chewed compressed fiber tablets. The Grothin cracked open sealed ration blocks that contained everything their bodies needed in one dense slab. Eating was not an event. It was a function. You did it fast, you did it clean, and you moved on. Ravi did none of those things. He ate slowly. He used a flat tool to tear the bread and scoop up the stew. He chewed with his eyes half closed. He took almost 20 minutes to finish, while everyone around him was done in under 2. Doran, the Paul Yuri supervisor who managed Hall 7, was the first to say something. He was tall, four-armed, and had a voice that carried across any room without effort. He walked past Ravi's table, looked down at the open box, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "So humans really do tear apart dead animals and mix them with plants just to stay alive." Fascinating. A few workers laughed. Some made sounds of agreement. One Bravani clicked her mandibles in what passed for a grin. Ravi looked up. He met Doran's eyes for a moment, then looked back down and took another bite. He said nothing. This became the routine. Every day, Ravi opened his box. Every day, someone made a comment. Doran started calling him the chef, stretching the word out like it was something embarrassing. Others began timing his meals, comparing his 20 minutes to their 90 seconds. They saw it as waste, inefficiency, proof that humans were still primitive creatures who had not figured out how to eat properly. Ravi never responded. Not once. 3 seats away, a small Bravani data clerk named Scylla watched all of this happen every day. She was quiet by nature, with thin green limbs and wide dark eyes that noticed everything. She had never spoken to Ravi directly, but she had been watching him since his first week. She noticed things the others missed. She noticed that Ravi always paused before his first bite, closing his eyes for just a second, like he was remembering something. She noticed that the food in his box was never the same 2 days in a row. She noticed that he washed the box himself every day in the shared cleaning station after everyone else had already left, rinsing it carefully, drying it with a cloth he kept in his pocket. She did not understand any of it. But something about the way he treated that box made her feel like she was watching something important that she did not have the words for yet. On this particular day, the hall emptied fast after the break. Doran and his crew left first, still chuckling about something. The others filtered out in small groups. Ravi stayed behind, standing at the cleaning station, running water over the metal container. The hall was silent. The lights hummed overhead. Scylla stood near the door, watching him for a moment. She wanted to say something. She almost did. But instead she turned and walked out, her small feet clicking softly on the floor. Ravi dried the box, closed the clasp, and tucked it under his arm. He walked back to his workstation alone, the same way he always did. Tomorrow he would open it again, and they would laugh again, and he would say nothing again. But the box would be full that IT was always full. The smell of cumin and garlic had no name in any alien language spoken on Palara. This was not because the station lacked words. The Poluri alone had over 600 terms for different mineral compounds. The Bravani could describe 12 kinds of silence. The Grothan had a single word that meant both duty and breathing because they considered the two things identical. But none of them, in all their centuries of language, had ever needed a word for the way warm spices moved through cold air and made a room feel smaller in a good way. Ravi did not think about this. He just cooked. Every morning, he woke up 90 minutes before his shift and stood in the tiny kitchen space inside his quarters. The station had given him standard human accommodations, which meant a bed, a desk, a cleaning unit, and a food preparation surface that most humans use to heat prepackaged meals. Ravi used it for something else entirely. He kept a small collection of ingredients stocked in sealed containers on a shelf above the counter. Rice, lentils, flour, salt, oil, dried chilies, turmeric, cumin, coriander, mustard seeds, a jar of ghee he had made himself from butter he traded for at the station market. These are not expensive things. They were simple, but they were his, and they were hers. His grandmother had raised him from the age of 6. His parents died in a flood that swallowed their village in under an hour, and she had carried him out of the water on her back. She was not a tall woman. She was not strong in the way people usually meant, but she fed him every day of his life until the day she could not anymore. And in all those years, she taught him something that most of the galaxy had never learned. Food was not fuel. Food was language. Every dish she made carried a message. Turmeric in warm milk meant healing. Extra ghee on the rice meant celebration. Plain dal with salt and nothing else meant honesty, because sometimes life was simple and you did not need to dress it up. When Ravi was sad, she made kheer, sweet and slow, stirred until it thickened. When he was angry, she made parathas, pressing the dough flat with her hands, showing him that even hard things could be shaped with patience. She died 2 years before Ravi left Earth. He packed her recipes in a small notebook and carried it across the stars the same way she once carried him out of the water. The lunchbox was not just a container. It was a conversation he was still having with a woman who could no longer answer. None of the aliens in Hall 7 knew any of this. They saw a man eating strange food slowly and assumed he was backward 3 weeks after the jokes began. Scylla finally spoke to him. She waited until the hall was mostly empty. Most workers left the moment their nutrient intake was complete. Ravi, as always, was still eating. Scylla walked over and stood near his table, her thin green fingers folded together nervously. "Why is your food different colors?" she asked. Ravi looked up. Nobody had asked him a question about his food before. Plenty had made comments, but no one had been curious enough to actually ask. That he looked down at his box. Today it held yellow rice with turmeric, a dark brown chickpea stew, bright orange carrot pickle, and green spinach folded into the bread. "Different ingredients do different things," he said. "Some give you energy. Some help fight sickness. Some are just there because they make you happy." Scylla tilted her head. Her wide, dark eyes blinked twice. "You eat things that make you happy. Sometimes that is the whole point," Ravi said. She stood there for a moment, processing this. In her entire life, she had never once thought about food in terms of happiness. Food was input. You consumed what your body required, and you stopped. The idea that a species would deliberately choose what to eat based on emotion was something she had no framework for. "That is very strange," she said. "I know," Ravi said, and for the first time in weeks, he smiled. Scylla did not smile back because Bravani faces did not work that way. But her antennae lifted slightly, which meant almost the same thing. She returned to her seat without another word. But the next day, she sat one chair closer to Ravi. And the day after that, One chair closer again, Doran noticed. He was sorting a cargo manifest near the back wall when he saw Scylla sitting near the human, watching him eat with what looked like genuine interest. He shook his head and muttered to a co-worker beside him. Humans waste time on everything, even survival. The co-worker agreed. They both turned back to their work and forgot about it. But Scylla did not forget. She had started keeping a small list on her personal datapad. Every day, she wrote down one thing she noticed about Ravi's lunch: yellow rice, brown stew, green bread, eats slowly, closes eyes before first bite. She did not know what the list meant yet. She did not know why she was keeping it. But something in her quiet, careful mind told her that the human with the metal box was carrying something much heavier than food. She just could not see it yet. The lights flickered twice before anyone understood what was happening. IT started as a low hum, the kind of sound that lived in the walls of every station and was easy to ignore because it had always been there. But then the hum dropped. It fell below what even the Grothin could hear, and the floor under Hall 7 groaned like something deep in the station had just stopped breathing. Then the cold came that IT did not arrive slowly. One moment the hall was at standard temperature. The next, the air turned sharp. Breath became visible. The metal surfaces on the desks and walls went from cool to icy in under a minute. Workers looked up from their stations, confused. A few stood. A few called out questions that nobody could answer. The station-wide announcement came 30 seconds later that a calm, automated voice explained that the main thermal regulation system on Paulara 9 had experienced a critical failure. Emergency backup systems were keeping life support active, but all secondary power functions, including food synthesis stations, nutrient dispensers, and cargo lifts, were shut down until further notice. Emergency rations were stored on the upper decks. Delivery to the lower levels was estimated at 10 to 15 hours. 10 to 15 hours. The reaction in Hall 7 was immediate. Some workers froze in place, unsure what to do. Others began talking fast, checking personal supply pouches, tapping communication devices. A Paul Urey engineer near the back wall cursed in a language that sounded like gravel falling downstairs. Most species on the station ate on strict schedules. Their metabolisms were designed for efficiency. Small meals, taken at regular intervals, with no room for delay. Missing even one cycle caused discomfort. Missing 2 caused weakness, headaches, shaking. Missing 3 was a medical concern, and the dispensers were down. All of them. Doran stood in the center of the hall, his 4 arms crossed, his face unreadable. He was already calculating. He had a single emergency nutrient cube in his desk drawer. It would last him 4 hours. After that, nothing. Scylla sat at her station, perfectly still. The Bravani could go longer without food than most, but the cold was a different problem. Her species was not built for low temperatures. Her thin limbs were already trembling slightly. Ravi sat at his desk and listened to the announcement without moving. When it ended, he stood up, pushed a chair in, and walked out of the hall without saying a word. Nobody noticed. They were all too busy worrying about themselves that he was gone for almost 20 minutes. When he came back, he was carrying 2 large cloth bags, one over each shoulder. They were heavy. He walked to the center of the hall and set them down on the longest table. People looked up. Ravi opened the first bag and began pulling things out. A sealed container of rice, a bag of dried lentils, a pouch of salt, small jars of turmeric, cumin, and coriander, a bottle of oil, canned vegetables, a packet of dried onion flakes. Then he reached into the second bag and pulled out something that made Doran's eyes narrow with confusion. It was a small, portable heating unit, compact, battery-powered, with a flat surface on top and a single temperature dial. It was clearly old. The edges were scratched. A piece of tape held one side panel in place. But it worked. Ravi had brought it from Earth, and he had never once used it on the station until now. He placed it on the table, turned the dial, and waited for it to heat. "What are you doing?" Doran asked from across the room. Ravi looked up at him. His face was calm. His voice was quiet, making enough for everyone. Nobody laughed. Nobody made a joke. The hall was too cold and too scared for that. Ravi poured oil onto the heating surface. It sizzled softly. He added cumin seeds and let them pop. then dried onion flakes, then turmeric and salt. The smell rose into the freezing air like something golden and warm that had no right to exist in a place this cold. He added lentils that he had soaked in water from the cleaning station. He added rice. He stirred it all together with a flat metal spoon he had pulled from his pocket, and then he added more water and covered it with a shallow metal plate to trap the heat. Nobody in the hall moved. 40 beings from 12 different species stood or sat in silence, watching a human cook food on a broken table in a freezing room like it was the most natural thing in the world. Scylla watched from her chair, her trembling hands pressed together. She recognized what he was making, not the dish itself, but the way he moved, the calm in his hands, the focus in his eyes. She had seen it every day for weeks when he opened his lunchbox. This was the same thing, just bigger. The pot, such as it was, began to bubble. Steam rose from the edges of the plate, covering it. The smell spread across the hall, thick and warm, and completely unlike anything the station's recycled air had ever carried. Ravi stood over the table, stirring gently, his breath visible in the cold. He did not look up. He did not need to. He already knew they were watching. The first bowl sat on the table, steaming, and nobody touched it. It was a simple thing. Just rice and lentils cooked together with salt and turmeric and a little cumin. Ravi had made this dish 1,000 times. His grandmother called it khichdi, and she said it was the oldest recipe in the world. Not the fanciest, not the most beautiful, just the oldest. Because when someone was cold or sick or lost, this was the thing you made. It did not need much. It just needed to be warm and given with both hands. Ravi had cooked the first batch in about 30 minutes. The portable heater was small, so he could only make enough for 8 or 9 bowls at a time. He had already started the second batch, but the first one sat there, golden yellow and steaming, and 60 beings stared at it like it might bite them. He understood. Most of these species had never eaten anything that looked like this. Their food came in cubes, pastes, tablets, and sealed packets. It was designed to be consumed, not experienced. The idea of sitting in front of a warm bowl of something that smelled like a place you had never been was not just unfamiliar. It was uncomfortable. Scylla stood up first. She walked across the hall on her thin green legs, her antennae flat against her head from the cold. She stopped in front of Ravi and looked at the bowl. Then she looked at him. "May I?" she asked quietly. Ravi nodded and pushed the bowl toward her with both hands, the way his grandmother had taught him to serve food. Never with one hand. Never carelessly. Both hands. Always. Scylla picked up the bowl. It was warm against her fingers. She brought it close to her face and breathed in. Her antennae lifted. She took a small sip from the edge. She went very still. "It is warm inside me," she said. Ravi tilted his head. "That is what it is supposed to do." "No," Scylla said. "I do not mean the temperature. I mean something else. I do not have a word for it." Ravi looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "My grandmother called it comfort." Scylla repeated the word quietly to herself, like she was storing it somewhere safe. After that, others came forward. Slowly at first, a Bravani worker sat down and accepted a bowl with shaking hands. A Paul-Yuri engineer picked one up, sniffed it, and drank it in 3 long pulls, then sat down heavily and stared at the table. A growth and maintenance worker, whose species ate only solid ration blocks, looked at the liquid with deep suspicion before finally tasting it. He said nothing, but he came back for a second bowl. Ravi kept cooking, batch after batch. He adjusted as he went. Some species had trouble with certain compounds, so he made a plain version with just rice and salt for those with sensitive systems. He asked questions before serving. "Can you process plant fiber? Are you sensitive to sulfur compounds? Is this temperature safe for you?" He treated every bowl like it mattered because every bowl did matter. Hours passed. The cold did not let up. The cargo lifts were still locked. The emergency rations were still somewhere on the upper decks, sitting behind sealed doors that nobody could open. Down in Hall 7, the only heat came from a battered little machine sitting on a table, and the only food came from a man who had never once been thanked for bringing his lunch. Doran held out the longest. He stood against the far wall, all 4 arms crossed, watching the line of workers approach the human's table. His face was hard to read, but his body language was clear. He didn't want to go over there. He did not want to eat something a human made. He had spent weeks calling this man primitive. Walking over to that table meant admitting he was wrong, and Doran was not built for that. But the cold kept pressing, and the hunger kept growing. And eventually, his legs carried him forward without permission from his pride. He sat down at the end of the table. He did not look at Ravi. He did not say a word. Ravi placed a bowl in front of him. Both hands. No hosetashchen. No smagnis. No payback for the weeks of jokes, and the name-calling and the laughter. Just a bowl of warm food, pushed gently forward by a man who had already decided a long time ago that kindness did not keep score. Doran ate. He ate slowly, which was unusual for him. And when he finished, he stayed at the table for a long time, staring at the empty bowl like it had just told him something he was not ready to hear. Ravi did not sit down until every last being in the hall had been served. He scraped the bottom of the final pot, portioned out the last of the rice and lentils, and handed the last bowl to a young Bravani worker who had been too shy to come forward until now. Then he sat down with an empty bowl in front of him. Scylla noticed immediately. She walked over and looked at his bowl, then at him. "You did not keep any for yourself," she said. Ravi shrugged. "The cook eats last. That is the rule." "Whose rule?" Ravi smiled. It was a tired smile, but it was real. "My grandmother's." Scylla looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached over and placed her hand on his, just for a second. It was the first time she had ever touched a human. His skin was warm even in the cold. She pulled her hand back and walked to her seat without another word. The hall was quiet. The cold was still there. But something in the room had changed, and none of them could name it yet. 3 days after the thermal failure was repaired, Ravi found a jar of dried herbs sitting on his desk when he arrived for his shift. There was no note, no name, just a small glass container with a sealed lid, filled with something dark green and finely ground. He picked it up, opened it, and smelled it. It was sharp and earthy, like dried moss mixed with pepper. He did not recognize it, but he knew what it was. A gift. From someone who did not know how to say thank you any other way. He placed the jar in his bag and sat down to work. He did not ask who left it. He did not need to. The hall was different now. Not in any way you could measure or record. The desks were the same. The lighting was the same. The shifts ran on the same schedule. But the air in Hall 7 had changed, and everyone in it could feel it, even if none of them could explain why. The jokes had stopped. Completely. No one called Ravi the chef anymore. No one timed his meals. No one made comments about dead animals or mixed plant matter. When he opened his lunchbox at the midday break, the workers around him either looked away respectfully or watched with quiet curiosity, like they were seeing something they had once misunderstood and were still figuring out. Doran was the most changed. He said less than before, which for a Paul-Yuri was unusual. His species communicated constantly, filling silence the way water fills cracks. But since that night, Doran had gone quiet in a way that felt heavy. He still managed the hall. He still gave orders. But when he walked past Ravi's desk, he nodded. Just once. Just enough. And he never said anything about the food again. Scylla, on the other hand, had become Ravi's shadow. She moved her workstation to the seat directly beside his. During breaks, she sat next to him and asked questions about whatever was in the box that day. Ravi answered all of them. He told her the names. Rice, dal, achar, roti, sabzi. She repeated each one carefully, her mandibles shaping the unfamiliar sounds. "What is this yellow one called again?" she asked one afternoon, pointing to a small mound of turmeric-stained potatoes. "Aloo," Ravi said. "Aloo," Scylla repeated. "And this is the one that helps with healing. That is what my grandmother believed." Scylla nodded seriously, as though she was filing this information into a category that mattered on the 4th day after the crisis. Ravi received a message on his work console. It was a summons. Commissioner Haddon, the Grothan official who oversaw all operations on Palar 9, wanted to see him in his office. Immediately, Ravi read the message twice. Then he stood up, straightened his shirt, and walked to the upper level that he had never been to the commissioner's office before. It was large and cold, in the way that Grothan preferred. The walls were bare metal. The desk was a solid block of dark stone. Haddon sat behind it like a boulder that had learned to breathe. He was enormous. His armored skin was gray and cracked in places, like old concrete. His eyes were small and deep-set, and they watched Ravi enter the room with the kind of focus that made most people forget how to stand. "Sit," Haddon said. Ravi Saturday hadn't stared at him for a long time. Then he asked a single question. "Why did you feed them?" Ravi blinked. He had expected a lecture about unauthorized equipment. A fine, maybe. A warning. Not this. "They were hungry," Ravi said. "And cold. So were you." "Yes." "But you fed them first." "Yes." Haddon leaned back. The stone chair groaned under his weight. He folded his massive hands together and placed them on the desk. "I have managed stations for 40 years," he said. "I have seen emergencies across 9 systems. Power failures, hull breaches, supply collapses. I have seen species hoard rations and fight over water. I have seen crews seal their quarters and refuse to open the door until help arrived. I have seen beings step over others who had collapsed in hallways." He paused. "I have never once seen someone open their own food supply and cook for strangers." Ravi did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing. "Is this normal for your species?" Haddon asked. Ravi thought about it honestly. "Not always," he said. "Humans can be selfish too. We can be cruel. But my grandmother taught me that food is how you tell someone they are not alone. I was just doing what she showed me." Haddon was silent for a long moment. His small eyes did not leave Ravi's face. Then he spoke again, slowly. "The station's official record will note that a human civilian prevented a nutritional crisis on the lower decks through voluntary resource sharing and independent food preparation. This action has no precedent in Palara 9's operational history." Ravi opened his mouth to say it was not that important, but Haddon was already standing. The commissioner rose to his full height, which put his head nearly level with the ceiling. He straightened his posture, pressed his right fist flat against his chest, and extended his left arm outward, palm up. Ravi did not know what this was, but Scylla would have. Doran would have. Anyone on the station would have recognized it instantly that IT was a growth in salute, reserved for officers who had served with exceptional honor. It had not been given to a civilian in over 200 years. Ravi stood, unsure of what to do. He settled for a small nod. Haddon held the salute for 3 full seconds. Then he lowered his arms and sat back down. "You may go," he said. Ravi walked out of the office on legs that did not feel entirely real. 6 weeks later, a Paul-Uri mechanic named Goss did something that had never been done in the history of Hall 7. That he brought food from home. That IT was not much. Just a small sealed container holding a thick, gray paste that his species normally consumed from dispensers. But he had mixed something into it, a pinch of dried root powder that added a faint, bitter flavor. He told no one why he did it. He simply sat down at his workstation during the midday break, opened the container, and ate slowly. Ravi noticed. He said nothing, but he smiled into his lunchbox, and that was enough. Things had been changing on Palara 9 in ways that were hard to track, but impossible to ignore. It started small. Scylla now sat beside Ravi at every break, and their conversations had become a quiet routine that others watched from the corners of their eyes. She had memorized the names of over 30 human dishes. She could not eat most of them, but she knew them the way some people know the names of stars they will never visit. "Biryani," she said one day, pointing at the layered rice in Ravi's box. "Close," Ravi said. "Paleo. Biryani has layers. Paleo is mixed together. What is the difference in meaning? Biryani is for when you want to impress someone. Paleo is for when you just want to be honest." Scylla considered this carefully. "I think I prefer paleo. So did my grandmother." Other workers had started approaching Ravi with quiet questions. A Bravani engineer asked if the yellow spice really helped with swelling. Ravi reached into his bag and gave her a small jar of turmeric. He explained how to dissolve a pinch of it in warm water and drink it slowly. She thanked him 3 times, which in Bravani culture meant she considered the gesture deeply personal. A young growth and cargo handler, barely out of training, stopped Ravi one morning and asked a question that clearly embarrassed him. "Is it true that humans eat together? At the same time? From the same table? Sometimes from the same plate," Ravi said. The Grothan stared at him like he had just described something sacred and terrifying at the same time. Word had spread beyond the hall. The incident report Commissioner hadn't filed had traveled through the station's administrative network and then outward along trade route communication lines. By the third week, 2 other stations had sent formal inquiries to Paulara, 9 requesting details about what had happened during the thermal failure. By the 5th week, the Galactic Cultural Exchange Office, a small bureau that most people forgot existed, contacted Ravi directly. They asked him to contribute to an advisory document on human communal feeding traditions. The concept they were most interested in had no direct translation in any galactic language. The closest they could get was preparing food for others as an act of care rather than self-preservation. They wanted to classify it as a formally recognized human social behavior. Ravi read the request on his console and sat with it for a long time. Then he wrote back a short message. He said he would be happy to help, but he wanted them to understand something first. What he did was not special. It was not a uniquely human invention. It was just something a grandmother taught a boy in a small kitchen on a heavy, dangerous, beautiful world. And the boy remembered. Doran approached Ravi one morning before the shift began. The Paul-Yuri stood at the edge of Ravi's desk, his 4 arms hanging at his sides instead of crossed, which was unusual for him. He looked uncomfortable in the way that large, proud beings look when they are about to say something that costs them. "I did not understand where your lunchbox was," Doran said. Ravi looked up at him. He waited. "I thought it was waste. I thought you were slow. I thought your food was something to laugh at." He paused. "I was wrong." Ravi nodded once. "I know." Doran stood there for another moment, then turned and walked back to his station. That was all. No long apology. No dramatic speech. Just 5 words that took a proud man 6 weeks to find, and a nod that told him they were enough. Life on the station continued. Shifts began and ended. Cargo moved through the docks. Reports were filed and forgotten. But in Hall 7, something had taken root that no system failure could shut down and no schedule could contain. Every morning, Ravi woke up early. He stood in his small kitchen and cooked. He packed his metal box carefully, each compartment filled with something that had a name and a meaning and a memory. And then he walked to the hall and sat down at his table. But now he packed a little extra. Not much. Just 1 more portion. Maybe 2. Enough for someone who might be having a hard day. Enough for someone who might need to know, without being told, that they were not invisible. On this particular morning, Ravi opened the clasp on his lunchbox and spread it out on the table. Scylla was already beside him. Goss, the Paul-Yuri mechanic, had moved his chair to the same row. A Bravani worker named Tally had taken to sitting at the far end of the table, not speaking, just being nearby. 3 others had drifted closer over the past week, pulled by something none of them could name. The hall was warm. The food was simple. Rice and dal and bread and pickle. The same things his grandmother made on quiet evenings when the world outside was loud and the kitchen was the only safe place left. Ravi closed his eyes for 1 second before the first bite. The same way he always did. The same small ritual that Scylla had noticed on his very first day. He was not praying. He was not thinking.